Welcome to this week's Udacity Deep Reinforcement Learning Nano-Degree weekly webinar. My name is Willie Proshek, and I'm a mentor for Udacity and an artificial intelligence engineer. We're going to talk about proximal policy optimization. Most of you should have are probably up to the policy-based methods, and proximal policy optimization is an incredible algorithm that is quite simple and is very, very powerful. It has been used by OpenAI for their Dota 5 and Dota 1v1 and has done incredible results, and is pretty much my go-to for most problems when I first encounter some. That or a deep queue network from going value-based, but the diversity of proximal policy optimization, that it's good for discrete action spaces and continuous, maybe not as good as SAC in some things, but can scale easily, and it's just such a simple algorithm. Anyway, I'll go on to what I will be talking about in this particular webinar. So I'm going to talk about what is PPO. I'm going to talk about the or min-max algorithm. I'm going to talk about line search, trust region, what is the maximum step in trust region, intuition behind it, what are the challenges, PPO with adaptive KL penalty, PPO with clipped objective, some thoughts, and then a Q&A at the end. So let's just go through some quick facts of what is PPO. So PPO is motivated by the same question as TRPO. How can we take the biggest possible improvement step on a policy using data we currently have without stepping so far that we accidentally cause performance collapse? PPO methods are significantly simpler to implement and empirically seem to perform at least as well as TRPO. PPO is an on-policy algorithm. PPO can be used for environments with either discrete or continuous action spaces. There are two primary variants of PPO, PPO penalty and PPO clip, which I'll talk about a bit more later. PPO clip's probably, I would say, slightly better. Actually, it is better, but some people may say no to that. PPO explained. So a quote from OpenAI on PPO. Proximal policy optimization, which performs comparably or better than state-of-the-art approaches while being much simpler to implement and tune. Actually, I would say this statement is comparing with the real impact. Policy gradient methods have convergent performance, which is addressed by the natural policy gradient. However, in practice, natural policy gradient involves a second-order derivative matrix, which makes it not scalable for large-scale problems. The computational complexity is too high for real tasks. Intense research is done to reduce the complexity by approximate second-order method. PPO uses a slightly different approach. Instead of imposing hard constraints, it formalizes the constraints as a penalty in the objective function. By not avoiding the constraint at all costs, we can use a first-order optimizer like gradient descent method to optimize objective. Even we may violate the constraints, and once in a while, the damage is less and the computation is much simpler. Let's go through quickly on the basic concepts before explaining PPO in details. The min-max algorithm. How can we optimize a policy to maximize the rewards? With the min-max algorithm, this is achieved iteratively by maximizing a lower bound function m, the blue line below, approximating the expected reward n locally. First, we start off with an initial policy guess and find the lower bound of m for n. And the policy, we optimize m and use the optimal policy for m as the next guess. We approximate the new lower bound again, a new guess, and repeat the iterations until the policy converges. To make it work, we need to find a lower bound m that is easier to optimize. Line search. There are two major optimization methods, the line search, like the gradient descent, and the trust region. Gradient descent is easier, fast, and simple to optimize an objective function. This is why it is so popular in deep learning. Even more accurate methods are available. Line search 2. So, line search first picks the steepest direction and then moves forward by a step. But how can this strategy go wrong in reinforcement learning? Let's take a robot to the Angel's Landing for hiking. As shown below, we ascend the hill by determining the direction first. If the step size is too small, it will take forever to get to the peak. But if it's too big, we can fall down the cliff. Even if the robot survives the fall, it lands in an area with height much lower than where it were. Policy gradient is mainly an on-policy method. It searches actions from the current state. Hence, we resumed exploration from a bad state with a locally bad policy. This hurts performance. Trust region. In the trust region, we determine the maximum step size that we want to explore first. Yellow circles. See? Then we locate the optimal point within the region and resume the search from there. Trust region part 2. What is the maximum step in a trust region? In the trust region method, we start with initial guess. Optionally, we can readjust the region size dynamically. For example, we can shrink the region if the divergence of the new and current policy is getting large, or vice versa. In order not to make bad decisions, we can shrink the trust region if the policy is changing too much. So let's have a look at this. In PPO, we limit how far we can change our policy in each iteration through KL divergence. KL divergence measures the difference between two data distributions, P and Q. So that's the policy and the value. We repurpose it to measure the difference between two policies. We don't want any new policies to be too different from the current one. So these are the difference between the two policies. This is using the Dale convergence. So that's the policy, and that's the value. So how can we limit policy change to make sure we don't make bad decisions? Turns out we can find lower bound function M as and second terms in the KL divergence. L is the expected advantage function, the expected reward minus baseline like value S for the new policy. It is estimated by an old or current policy and then recalibrates using the probability ratio between the new and the old policy. We use the advantage function instead of the expected reward because it reduces the variance of the estimation. As long as baseline does not depend on our policy parameters, the optimal policy will be the same. Now, let's take a look in more detail at the second term in M and 2 pages of proof in the TRPO paper. We can establish the following bound. Second term in M is the maximum of the KL divergence, underlined in red above there. But it is too hard to find, and therefore we relax the requirement a little bit by using the mean of the KL divergence instead of let's explain that intuitively. Let's look at the intuition behind it. So the L approximates the advantage function locally at the current policy. But if it gets less accurate, it moves away from the old policy. This actually has an upper bound. That is the second term in M. After considering the upper bound of this area, we can guarantee that the calculate optimal policy within the trust region is always better than the old policy. If the policy is outside the trust region, even the calculated value may be better, but the accuracy can be too off and cannot be trusted. So the bet is off. Let's summarize objective below. Mathematically, both of the equations below can be solved to the same optimal policy. However, the theoretical threshold is very small and is considered to be too conservative. So we relax the condition once more by setting them as tunable hyperparameters. As mentioned before, M should maximize to optimize. So we further approximate into a quadratic equation which is in the convex function and heavily studied on how to optimize it in high-dimensional spaces. We use the Taylor series to expand the term up to the second order, but the second order of L is much smaller than the KL divergence term and will be ignored. Therefore, the objective and gradients can be approximated as the following. Our objectives become the following, which I'll let you have a look through. We can solve this quadratic equation analytically, and the solution is below. So what are the challenges? So let's get into that. This solution involves the calculation of the second order derivative and is inverse and very expensive operation. As you can see, there's too much going on. But there are two approaches to address this problem. Approximate some calculation involving the second order derivative and its inverse to lower computational complexity, or make the first order derivative solution, like the gradient descent, closer to the second order derivative solution by adding soft constraints. TRPO and ACKTO adopt the first approach. PPO is closer to the second one. We can still live with a bad policy decision once in a while, so we stick with the first order solution like stochastic gradient descent. But we're going to add a soft constraint to the objective function, so the optimization will have better insurance that we are optimizing within the trust region. So the change of bad decision is smaller. Now, there's two main ways which we talked about with PPO, and one of them is PPO with adaptive KL penalty, which I'll go through now. And one way to formulate our objective is to changing the constraints to a penalty in the objective function. Beta controls the weight and penalty. It penalizes the objective, and the new policy is different to the old policy. Borrow a page from the trust region. We can dynamically adjust beta. D below is the KL divergence between the old and the new policy. With a higher than target value, we shrink B. Similar, if we fall below another target value, we expand the trust region. Here is the algorithm. So here is the algorithm. This is performance of TPO at speed closer to the gradient descent method. Can we do better? As you can see, we initially possibly the policy parameters, initial KL penalty, and target KL divergence. And then for K0, we do collect a set of partial trajectories of the policy. We estimate the advantage using the advantage estimation algorithm. We compute the policy update. By taking K-step of mini-batch, we use SGG via Atom, and then we go through the following. Now, let's talk about PPO with clip objective. PPO with clip objective can even do better. Its implementation, we maintain two policy networks. The first one is the current policy that we want to refine. The second is the policy that we want to collect samples. With the idea of importance analysis, we can evaluate a new policy with sample collected from the old policy. This improves sample efficiency. But as we refine the current policy, the difference between the current and old policy is getting larger. The variance of the estimation will increase, and we will make a bad decision because of the inaccuracy. So say for every 4 iterations, we synchronize the second network to refine policy again. With clipped objective, we compute the ratio between the new policy and the old policy. This ratio measures how difference between two policies. We construct a new objective function to click the estimated function, advantage function. The new policy is far away from the old policy. Our new objective function becomes the following. I'll let you have some time to read through that. the probability ratio between the new policy and the old policy falls outside the range, then the advantage function would be clipped if set to 2 or experiments in PPO. Effectively, this discourages last policy changes if it's outside a comfortable zone. Here is the algorithm for PPO clipped. This is the new method. It's simple and can use gradient descent like atom optimize to atom to optimize. In fact, it is an anticlimax for taking so detailed analysis of issues that come up with such a simple solution. So we initialize the policy parameters, clipping threshold, collect the set of partial trajectories, we estimate the advantage using the advantage estimation, we compute policy updates, we're taking the case step from the index, and then we basically do the following clipped version. So here's a quote from PPO again. Q-learning with function approximation fails on many simple problems and is poorly understood. Vanilla policy gradient methods have poor data efficiency and robustness. And trust region policy observation is relatively complicated and it's not comparable with architectures that include noise such as dropouts or parameter sharing between the policy and value function, or with auxiliary tasks. PPO adds a soft constraint that can be optimized by first-order optimizer. We may make some bad decisions once in a while, but it strikes a good balance and speed of optimization. Experimental results prove that this kind of balance achieves the best performance with most simplicity. Simplicity rules in deep learning. So let's have a bit of a Q&A. If you've got any questions, put them through. All right, so no one's got any questions? Well, thank you very much for this week's webinar. Next week I'll be talking about actor-critic methods. Hopefully you guys will quite enjoy that. I'll have time to go through that, maybe show a bit of a demonstration as well. So thank you very much for this week, and I hope you guys have fantastic learning. Bye for now.